Yawaskano. I'm thankful you are well. My name is Janine Bowen, and I would like to welcome all of you to today's panel discussion on behalf of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, the United Religions Initiative, the G20 Interfaith Forum Anti-Racism Initiative, and the Seventh Generation Fund. We invite all of you to join us in honoring the past, celebrating the present, and envisioning a future where Indigenous cultures, languages, and traditions thrive. At this time, if you require a specific language, please look to the bottom of the screen and find the settings for interpretation. At this time, please select the language that you would like to hear during this webinar. Again, my name is Janine Bowen. I am a member of the G20 Interfaith Forum Anti-Racism Initiative. The mission of this initiative centers on exposing racism where it exists among the G20 member nations and offering policy solutions to advance the goal of racial equality and equity by every means available. I am also a citizen of the Seneca Nation and the moderator and panel member for this webinar. I look forward to sharing with all of you today. The aims of this webinar are to acknowledge the history of colonization, highlight Indigenous resilience, and celebrate the diversity of Indigenous cultures of the Americas. Colonization has left a profound and lasting impact on Indigenous peoples, including high poverty rates, environmental degradation, discrimination, cultural loss due to assimilationist policies, and infringement upon their lands and sovereignty. However, Indigenous peoples of the Americas have demonstrated determination to restore cultural practices, spirituality, and their own languages. As the director of the Seneca Language Department on the Allegany territory of the Seneca Nation, located in the western region of New York State, I have witnessed the resilience of the Haudenosaunee people, the people of the Longhouse, also known as the Iroquois or Six Nations. The Seneca were the largest of 6 indigenous nations, which comprised the Iroquois Confederacy, a democratic government predating the United States Constitution. By the 1500s, the Haudenosaunee had already come into contact with Europeans who brought Christianity to their villages. Through a series of papal decrees known as the Doctrine of Discovery, the Catholic Church encouraged the Europeans to take over all of the Americas in order to spread Christianity. The doctrine was laid out in a series of papal bulls or decrees. The first one was issued in 1452. These bulls authorized colonial powers to seize lands and subjugate people in Africa and the Americas, as long as the indigenous peoples on the lands were not Christians. European expansion was fueled by a sort of missionary sense that the Western monarchies had the right to go to these new lands and to take their resources, and if necessary, to subjugate the indigenous peoples. The doctrine of discovery has been cited in different areas, different arenas, different venues for centuries. The US Supreme Court cited the doctrine of discovery as early as 1823 and as recently as 2005. Based on the doctrine of discovery, European powers, and eventually the US government, used Christianity to destroy the Haudenosaunee way of life. US Indian boarding schools used Christianity as a means of assimilation in hopes that indigenous resistance would eventually cease once cultural erasure occurred. Even the Seneca Nation could not escape the reach of the Indian boarding schools. The Thomas Indian School operated on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation from 1855 until 1957, serving as a mechanism for civilizing and converting indigenous children to Christianity. These colonial legacies have certainly impacted the traditional practices of the Seneca people. Currently, we are not a spiritually cohesive community. Both churches and longhouses exist on our territories. The number of Senecas who attend our traditional longhouse ceremonies is quite small when compared to the total Seneca population. However, it is now growing, but that wasn't always the case. When my mother was a young girl, President John F. Kennedy approved the construction of the Kinzua Dam. The construction of this dam had a devastating impact on the Allegany territory of the Seneca Nation, flooding over 10,000 acres, displacing hundreds of people from their homes, and destroying ancestral lands. Due to forced relocation, a significant amount of cultural heritage was lost. Moreover, a large part of the territory is now underwater, under the Allegany Reservoir. After this occurred, my mom said just a few families kept the ceremonies going at the Cold Spring Longhouse because many of the Longhouse people had lost hope. They had kind of given up. However, all hope was not lost. Over the last 20 years, the number of people attending our Longhouse ceremonies has grown, thanks to the efforts of local first language speakers, Longhouse leaders, educators, and Seneca Nation leadership who believe in the power of our traditional knowledge systems. 2 first language speakers and spiritual leaders founded the Faith Keeper School. Its mission is to create socially responsible citizens who are exposed to the traditions of the Seneca people. The Seneca Nation Council and executives have supported the development of adult language and culture programs. These programs have also created a resurgence of traditional practices. Participants in the programs attend Longhouse ceremonies to gain a deeper understanding, a deeper connection to the Seneca culture and language. These adult learners, in turn, bring their children to learn with them. Moreover, the adult language and culture programs offer instruction to community members who wish to better understand our traditions. On an inspirational note, the adult Seneca language learners who have reached an intermediate to advanced proficiency level have taken on the challenge of establishing an immersive language nest for infants and toddlers whose parents are capable of maintaining Seneca language use in the home. Many of these families also attend the Longhouse ceremonies and continue to assist in carrying on our traditions. There are after-school and summer language and culture programs for children who attend our public schools. Several of the schools have also started to support the expansion of their current Seneca language and culture programs. I do want to explain, I said our public schools, meaning local. They are not schools run by the Seneca Nation. Unfortunately, most of our children go to New York State public schools. But some of these schools have started to make efforts to support advanced learning for the Seneca people. One of these schools has even allowed a high school language instructor to take her students to attend a major ceremony so that they could have exposure not just to the Seneca language, but other Haudenosaunee languages. So the work carried out to reach our youth has led to more young people participating in Longhouse ceremonies. It brings tears to my eyes when I see a young person actively participating in our ceremonies, even when Seneca language use is required. This has been a big shift even since I started coming to our Longhouse here on this territory many years ago. I now see children who are practicing and learning and dancing and singing, and it's just very, very encouraging. To ensure the Seneca people continue to find a connection with our language and culture and traditions, as a spiritual leader and educator, I must continue my healing journey. I must transform the intergenerational trauma buried in my body. I must develop and sustain the patience and love needed to assist others in their journey to find connection with our traditions and our beautiful language. Our Indigenous identities across the Americas have been under constant attack for centuries. Imagine how difficult it is to start learning about one's Indigenous language and culture when you know how much criticism and mistake-making can hurt. I came to realize this after accidentally triggering an elder who had lost her language. Imagine how that had impacted her self-identity. She cried when we started the lesson. I could not console her. Initially, I thought the act of learning simply triggered a buried trauma. However, I soon realized that it was tied to her sense of identity. I also became fully aware that to demonstrate more patience and love needed to create a safe space for my students to explore their identities, I must actively heal my own trauma. And I feel that all Indigenous leaders must do the same if we want to truly guide our people to find a comfortable and powerful spot to carry out their inner transformations. I knew then that I had to heal myself to soften my energy for my Seneca language and culture students because the very act of learning the language and culture ripped from our people meant redefining one's self-identity. And this is such a deep process for every student. If you're inspired by today's webinar to start supporting Indigenous-led movements, such as the ones I mentioned above, the movements for cultural preservation and environmental awareness, cultural restoration, any of those things, you must first determine how you are viewed by the community to find the most appropriate supporting role you can play. If you are a non-Indigenous ally, please remind yourself that these efforts are the journeys of Indigenous peoples to reclaim our own cultures and traditions. Being overly helpful can seem a bit invasive. Lend us an ear. We get overwhelmed sometimes. This work is tough. It's beautiful work, but it's tough. So sometimes we just need a patient ear. Help us problem solve when we're open to it. Aid us in finding and securing funding sources. That's a great way to help us. Use your networks to connect us with the people who have the skills we need to move forward with our plans. Sometimes we just need to know the right people to get things done. And volunteer to help us with events. But please let us take the lead. Let us take the lead. I have a few other things that you could do if you really want to support. Maybe you're just starting the journey. So I hope you find these helpful. If you haven't done so already, you could also learn about the Indigenous people who live in your area. You could learn their history and how they live today. You could even purchase from Indigenous artisans and Indigenous-owned businesses. Or perhaps you could visit Indigenous cultural centers and museums on their own lands to see how the culture and traditions live on. So I hope you found these examples of how you can support our efforts helpful. At this point in time, I would like to introduce my fellow panelists. Fany González from the Pueblo Kuna of Panama and a representative of Mujeres, Kunas, Artesanas, and Francisco Morales, a Global Council Trustee for Latin America and the Caribbean for the United Religions Initiative. For more biographical information about the moderator and panelists, please refer to the chat box. And before my fellow panelists begin, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar aims to acknowledge the history of colonization and its profound impact on Indigenous communities of the Americas by recognizing the ongoing challenges they face as a result of colonization and genocide. Number two, to highlight Indigenous resilience by showcasing stories of cultural restoration, language revival, environmental stewardship, and the resurgence of Indigenous spirituality and traditions. And number three, to celebrate the diversity of Indigenous cultures, languages, and identities across the Americas. Just a quick note, if you have a question you would like to ask, please click on the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to submit your inquiry. Also, directing your question to the moderator or one of the panelists specifically will minimize confusion and any delays in response time. However, this feature might not be activated until the panelists near completion of their presentations, so be on the lookout for the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Francisco Morales, you now have 10 minutes to share your perspective on how to restore Indigenous ancestral traditions in an urban setting and how to incorporate faith-based and interfaith organizations and cultural restoration efforts of Indigenous communities. Perhaps you could also share examples of respectful collaboration if time allows. You may begin.
I want to greet everyone, each and everyone, and especially Fany González. We started together in URI. I am very happy to be together with you today. I want to be slow so that Maria can do the interpretation. This states that this title of the webinar because as Janine has said, from 1492, our continent suffered the coming of a civilization with power and with baggages and goods brought to our continent a different vision of the world. Not only brought some new illnesses, some new animals, different races, but also brought what is, I feel, the most important. They brought a different vision of the world. And this is why, for us, it was a change, a total change of the way that we lived. This is something that we need to understand. It's a total change of our lives. We had a philosophy, we had a cosmovision that existed before the colonization, before the religions that came after. So it is important to understand. And I underline to, as a member of the United Religions Initiative, things that appears, for instance, in the constitution of the Argentine um, constitution. I am from the Aymara nation. In the first constitution of our country, what it said was, we provide the security in the frontiers, cons- keep the specific the treatment with indigenous, and promote the conversion to Christianity. And this was the goal that we had in 1853 in the Constitution of Argentina related to indigenous. So the state had to get in touch with indigenous. And this way of related with indigenous, I belong to a generation of indigenous peoples that reject the idea to look backwards. What I try to do is to look forward. In this is my context. Personally, I believe that it is important to cut with all what brought us the colonialism brought to us. That is this idea that we cannot do the things, that we are not capable of doing the things, that we are not able to go back to freedom, and that we always need someone that would help us. Is we think that we always need support. I don't think so. I think that we can cut with the colonialism is when we are able to build our own future. One of the things that I started doing, and I was one of the first in Argentina, is start writing. Use the Spanish language and use written language to keep our ancestral knowledge. In the time I started to write here in Argentina, many of our sisters and brothers, are you writing? We indigenous are oral, not persons that write. What are you communicating? Who are you communicating with? I was not understood at that time. Now, in Argentina, there are a lot of writers that come from the indigenous nations because they have seen that what we write, the non-indigenous start understand and admit. Writing helped us to get to with non-indigenous. Another of the barriers that we find is speaking English. In Argentina, we are trying to help that sisters and brothers start speaking English. I started to learn English. I always challenge myself to try and understand English so that we can bring our knowledge, so that we don't depend on translation. I am not able to be here and say what I want to say in English at this moment, but I try myself. The resilience is something that indigenous have in their blood. Why? Because if there's something that indigenous have from ancestrality is the capacity to adapt ourselves. Why is it that indigenous people adapt? Because the ancestral cosmovision shows us that we cannot build anything, do anything that disharmonize the environment. We never do anything that destroys the nature or the harmony with Mother Earth. And this is why in our blood we have the capacity to adapt what is happening to us. A very concrete example that I want to share is when COVID time, many of many different people had addiction or problems of mental health, but didn't happen to indigenous people. Indigenous people had more complicated situations. However, in the indigenous communities, COVID was not such an impact. We didn't have suicide or addictions or mental health issues because of the pandemic, because indigenous people have this capacity to adapt. And even though we had a very tough time financially, we were able to adapt more than other members of the community. Another situation that I understand that is part of the resiliency going out from this colonialism or this state of colonialism that the conquest of America, and also this idea to be an indigenous in the city, the urban indigenous uh, are questions. Sometimes in United Nations, people don't like to understand this idea that indigenous can be urban. Not necessarily if we are in the city, we are not indigenous. And this is not true. I am in disagreement with that because this is colonialism. There is there are a lot of indigenous that are looking for their identity, but they want their livelihood and they come to the cities and they are sometimes not understood by the state. We have to be able to build an urban identity for the future because we are losing our ancestral knowledge because young people are going to the cities, so we have to deal with this. I'm thankful because we need to go back to our cosmovision. I invite everyone to whoever is participating, we have to go back to our cosmovision. Thank you. I'm going to leave my contact so that you can connect with me. Thank you.
Te Gonoño. I thank you, Francisco Morales, for sharing your perspective. And I completely agree that even since ancient times, indigenous peoples have had resiliency because we do know how to adapt for the empowerment and betterment of our people. That's why we're still here, and I'm thankful for that. Thank you for those words. At this time, I would like to introduce Fany González. You now have 10 minutes to share your perspective on how the traditional Kuna arts and crafts play a role in strengthening both the cultural and economic well-being of Kuna women, and the ways in which the work of Mujeres, Kunas, Artesanas has contributed to broader indigenous movements for justice, cultural preservation, and decolonization. You may begin. You have 10 minutes.
Hello. Greetings to all from Panama. I'm very thankful for the invitation to be here with you. And because you are dealing with this subject with us as indigenous Kuna here in Panama, as a member of Mocoa CC of URI, Artisans Women, We have advanced, we have walked, we had a lot of barriers or challenges, but we're able to overcome all these challenges, yeah, through this many years that we've been working with women in our cooperation circle. We work with women and with children, strengthening their culture and the tradition so that we don't lose our culture. Actually, we have a project because we not only take care of maintaining the tradition, the culture, the cosmovision. Also, we are trying to show the youth that we have all persons are different, and we try to not stigmatize. In Kuna people, we have a lot of albino people. It is very important for us to to show that youth have to be sensitive to the pains or to the diversity. There's a nice one of the leaders of our operations circle is working in a project that would um, help people recognize the diversity and non-discrimination for people that are different. We deal with a lot of obstacles, but we keep the good work.
Fany, at this time, would you mind answering a question so that we can hear some more of your words for a few more minutes? Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the ways in which your projects have empowered women. Maybe you have an example you could share with us.
Our project is 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 to maintain the craft that is used by Kuna people. With URI, we are trying to keep the the, the culture by using mola. We are showing younger girls and have a school where we teach younger girls this design that is very special for the Kuna people. And they teach girls from 5 to 7 how they saw the mola and how the design is created. And we give this possibility to young girls so that they keep the tradition and also they have a livelihood. We have in these schools we also talk with the girls about the different cultures. And now these girls are growing up, and we continue to work with them in the preservation of the mola and our design and our culture. So the focus of our work is work with women so that we empower them, giving them more culture and more possibilities to know the design and the culture through our schools.
Thank you so much, Fany, for sharing your words with us today. It is so very important that we remember we are all equal. And I appreciate that aspect of your program. At this time, I would like to thank Fany Yahweh. I'm thankful for your words, but we do want to share some more insights with our attendees today. So at this time, we will begin our question and answer session. Just a reminder, click on the Q&A feature to open the window for question submissions. Also, direct your question to the moderator or one of the panelists specifically to minimize any confusion about who should be answering. At this time, we have no open questions, so I'm going to pick one from the ones we were given previous to the webinar's commencement. So perhaps we could have Francisco talk a little bit about, what is mola? We do have a question. I am not a Spanish speaker, so I will defer to one of you. What is moda?
The mola is a traditional costume that Indigenous women wear. It has a special design, and this special design is part of a tradition. So we pass from elders to women to children. For instance, I was taught to design mola by my mother, and I'm teaching other girls. We are using this mola. It is kind of a cloth that are sewn in a very special way with beautiful colors. And this is used in shirts and in bags, and they are beautiful. And we are trying to adapt to the new time and where people would like to see the mola. And what we want is that the mola is not lost because it's part of our culture. We are here, the Kuna people are the only ones who design this special traditional custom, um, and and so it is important for us to share that.
Thank you so much, Fany, for your answer. We do have one more question, and it's kind of a comment as well regarding your beautiful necklace. They wonder if the necklace you are wearing was indeed made by one of the workshop participants in your program.
Necklace. I was in an Indigenous gathering a minute ago, and there's a young girl who creates this necklace. She's a craft, and she works with a small pearls, and she does this, and she belongs to our cooperation circle. Crafts are so important for Indigenous people because they're not only a beautiful thing, but they are also passion.
Thank you so much, Fany, for your answer. I'm going to ask my colleague Francisco to look in the Q&A section for the beautifully written Spanish question that I cannot read for you at the moment. It is directed to you. Hopefully you can see that.
So the question has to do, what is your dream for a society that is in crisis? The society is in crisis, not only question for the indigenous, it's a concern that we have for the world. We are undergoing a difficult moment. It is a very special moment to change, to bring a new paradigm, a different type of life. We are in a moment that we have to be conscious. We have been telling this for a long time, but today it's not a secret. Everybody understands and recognizes this, that this is a changing moment. We have to react and we have to bring action. And sometimes we don't. Uh, we are not aware about changes. The mola is not only a cloth; it's a way of looking at the world. Behind every design of the mola, we have a vision. Is in any artistic craft or thing that indigenous produce, there's something that we have to recuperate and be clear that we are giving a message, not only a message for our community, but it's a message for the community. This is one of my concerns, that we have a lot of richness, natural richness, but it is menaced by economical interest. For instance, the Amazonas, the mining, the water. If there's a dream that I have, it's that the cosmovision, indigenous cosmovision, or our ancestral wisdom, is is put at the side of science. So science and indigenous wisdom can work together. This is my dream because it's needed. It is very interested. If we come together, we can solve the problems of the earth.
Thank you, Francisco. I have one more question for you to answer if you would be so willing to do so. This question says, You've worked in the Interfaith dialogue for many years and currently serve as a Global Council trustee in Latin America for the United Religions Initiative. How can faith-based and interfaith organizations support Indigenous communities?
That's a great question. Thank you for that question. I loved it. This was a big thing for us. I want to respond. We know that when the Spaniards comes to America, brings the sword and the cross, and the spade, the and the cross go together. And for many indigenous, when people speak about religion, this is kind of forbidden. But however, 70% of indigenous in Latin America are Catholic or evangelists. And so the reality is that we find we have the political, and sometimes indigenous politically involved say that religion is something that we despise, but in the practical way and the everyday life, indigenous respect religion. When I entered in I entered because what United Religion says is dialogue with religions and the indigenous traditions and the spirituality. And this is why I got into URI, because I believe that an organization that is truly interfaith and concrete and where I want to work to, it has to find the ways to support financially or politically the road so that there's a recovery of the indigenous cosmovision. One thing that I repeat with Jerry White, the executive director of our organization, is that I don't want to be a part that of that is evangelizing indigenous. I want to be in an organization that believes in dialogue and helps indigenous to recover the cosmovision in dialogue with religions. I want you to understand 70% of our indigenous in Latin America are Christian. They wear their clothes, they talk about their languages, they keep the indigenous heart, and at the same time they I don't want to fight with religious. I don't want to fight with indigenous that are belong to this or that church. I want that the indigenous goes back to the cosmovision. They have to understand their identity. Are they Catholic or are they indigenous? Sometimes there are some aspects of their culture or identity that are lost in evangelization, and I think that you or I can be part of the recovery of the ancestral cosmovision.
It's very powerful indeed. Many of the Seneca people on my territory are also Christian, as was my mother. So it was always intriguing to me to try to find a way to bring our worlds together because they are very different worldviews, but have a respect for one another upon which we could build a bigger, more beautiful life for all of us together. It is very complicated, but possible with organizations like the URI. I would just like to read some of the statements in the question and answer box. Remember, if you do want to just make a statement, you are welcome, I believe, to possibly use the chat, but I'm not sure if that's just relegated to us. So I will read these for us. Thank you, Fany. So pleased that this is being done with the women. So important to keep this tradition alive. And the other one is Francisco or others. He knows writing in indigenous languages with Spanish and English translations. I'm not quite sure if that was a question, but if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that work, you are more than welcome. And then we have one other question if anybody feels moved to answer.
I believe that I think that how do we conceive environment is a little bit different. In the past, it was seen as something abstract. We have to study or control environment. In that context, indigenous have romanticized um, climate action. We became guardians of Mother Earth, but this has changed. At this time, people have seen that environment is nothing abstract. It's the work that we have to do is uh, um, we have to be very careful to act in favor of the Mother Earth. Now we see terrible things that would happen in Florida with the hurricane. We now have to bring something. We have to bring knowledge. I don't know if this is in United Nations. It is important that we create, bring the indigenous knowledge to schools and to universities, to daily life. Impact that uh, a law can bring is relative. I think that we have to work with the people and the consciousness. They have the awareness of the care of Mother Earth they have in their daily life. This sense, indigenous people have a great responsibility of being the lung of the new knowledge, the carriers of the new knowledge, and we have to empower ourselves and share this knowledge. I believe that we have to activate in economic determination. We cannot depend from state. We cannot depend on governments. We cannot depend on NGOs. We have to be empowered and produce and have a role in society. Nowadays, the resilience of indigenous people are hand in hand with the economic development. If not, I feel that we don't have a possibility. I have this book that I have written in the past. It is an essay that speaks about the state. How do we indigenous uh, conceive the state? Our vision is so different. When I really read my book, I feel that we are very different, uh, and the path is that non-indigenous and indigenous change. I think that we are on the good path. These spaces, as this webinar and URI, give us another spaces, give us the possibility to bring the change. It is difficult, yes, but we can overcome difficulties and challenges.
Thank you so much for answering that with such a thorough response. I do want to give Fany a chance to answer one question. This one is, what challenges do Kuna women face both within the community and from external forces in maintaining their cultural roles?
As women, as indigenous women, here in Panama, we face racism. This is the worst problem that women have, and even if we are in the 21st century, I feel I have I work in the government and still I am marginalized, and this is a big problem that we have as women and as indigenous women especially. One example, for instance, I resisted, I continued my life, even if some difficulties in the place where I'm working. I don't give up. I don't share uh, this idea of being discriminated. We continue to work. We talk with people that discriminate us. We create a women's group and we create a youth group. to avoid discrimination in society so that we can continue to work and be integrated with society, so that we can do what we want to do, our professional careers without being obliged. Uh, because sometimes we find obstacles, and because we are women and because we are indigenous, we are helping other women to feel strong to and support their family and work. But this is difficult because we find resistance. They don't want women or indigenous women in work.
Thank you, Fany. Yes, racism is still present, something we will continuously have to fight among our peoples, especially if we have resources in our territories that others want. That is our never-ending struggle. At this point, I would like to ask our final question, and this one is for either of you. Could you share examples of what keeps you going each day to carry out this important work? Because it isn't always easy. So what do you do, or what inspires you daily to continue to fight for Indigenous peoples and equality and against that evil force of racism in our everyday lives?
We are inspired to work, not to lose, so that we don't lose the tradition. It would be very uh, hard for that our generation grows without autonomy, without our traditions, without our culture. It would be very hard if we don't pass our culture to younger generations. We work and we are inspired to help younger generations to grow with indigenous identity. We take it in the blood, but also in the heart. I'm inspired to continue to work with younger generations because I know what we are and we value our tradition. And we want that to stand with pride for the Kuna culture.
Gracias. Francisco, did you want to share your words of encouragement for yourself and the world?
I am inspired in my work and see that what we achieve. I think that I am very a person that loves the concrete. Sometimes we have to give small steps, but these steps to be concrete in this new time, put as indigenous in the center, and it is time for we are giving some steps that are important. There are many things that are missing, but now that we are connected with the possibility to be in contact with non-indigenous, to be through platforms and through organizations connecting the world and being able to share experiences. This changed. This opened my mind. Now I know a lot of people. I can share my wisdom, and I'm passionate about freedom and democracy. I think that we can live in a world that is more healthy with Mother Earth and with ourselves. What is inspiring for me is that we can be part of the change. We need the change. And what is inspiring for me, but hopefully to all of us, is that we are able to change the society so that we can build in a healthier society. We have time. We don't have a lot of time as we think. If we get together and give energy to the changes, we can achieve what we need.
Beautiful. Now, at this point in time, we will do our concluding remarks from each of our panelists. At this point in time, I would like to offer Fany 2 minutes to state anything that she thinks we should be aware of before we end our webinar. So if you have any final statements or remarks, Fany, you have 2 minutes to do so.
As a last message, I want to say that we know we are not alone. There are a lot of people that are trying to support Indigenous people, and I know that there are many people who do it wholeheartedly. I have felt the support of URI for us in Panama and other organizations, and I am very thankful to URI because URI is always taking us into account, and also to say the world is changing and we need to uh, take care of Mother Earth because it's the place where we live, where we breathe, where we have food, and we have to take care of Mother Earth.
Thank you so much. Francisco, you have 2 minutes to expound more wisdom upon us.
I'm thankful to Audrey and you and those that are part of these organizations because they give us the possibility to communicate our experiences and our trajectories. I am so happy. As I said in the beginning, the most important thing that we have to understand, it is not a time for crying or weeping or feeling less. We have to feel empowered, start, walk, and we have, and that our spirit is contagious, and understand that the colonialism has left us in a situation of disability, but we are not disabled. It depends on us. Time depends on us. We are not disabled. We have capacity. We have our hands, our minds, and we can move forward. I want to talk about the memory of my ancestors, the leaders that passed away, all the leaders that have died, and building this new reality. And there are leaders in our community that are passing away because they have tried to keep the language or the culture. I am also trying to learn Aymara language, and we have to combine these efforts to build a good society.
Gracias. Yahweh, I'm thankful for all of our panelists today. At this point, I will make my very brief conclusion, and that is, after listening to all of us speak today, I hope we all realize that Indigenous people believe that we must empower ourselves to truly transform our communities and maintain our traditions, our languages, and cultures. So if you would like to support Indigenous folks in doing so, please allow them to do the hard work and ask them what they need to do so and move forward. At this point in time, this concludes our webinar, and I would like to thank the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, the United Religions Initiative, the G20 Interfaith Forum Anti-Racism Initiative, and the Seventh Generation Fund for organizing and supporting this webinar. I would also like to express my gratitude to our panelists who have assisted us in developing a deeper understanding of Indigenous resilience. Lastly, I would like to thank our attendees who have made the conscious effort to learn how to respectfully advocate for Indigenous peoples. Taneho, that is all. Thank you, everyone. Yahweh.